Hi, my name is Lillian Morvay, and I'm the founder and CEO of the Independent Broker-Dealer Consortium. Thank you so much for joining us this Thursday afternoon, and we're going to be discussing cyber risk management. It's a workshop that we are offering through the IBDC and RIAC, and I have invited two of my IBDC Alliance members. I would like to introduce you to Paul Horn. Paul is the founder and CEO of H2 Cyber. He has got a tremendous background in the cybersecurity industry and specifically working with independent broker-dealers. He is going to be walking you through a risk register that will provide you with the information necessary for you to identify your own vulnerabilities and cybersecurity risks. He's also going to be talking with you today about conducting a risk self-assessment for your cybersecurity vulnerabilities. Next, we will be joined by Sherry Pontalillo. Sherry Pontalillo is synonymous with professional liability for independent broker-dealers and RIAs. Sherry is an expert with respect to cybersecurity insurance, and she will be speaking with you today about the different cybersecurity policies that are available for independent broker-dealers and RIAs. There are so many choices that they have these days, and Sherry is going to talk with you about the nuances of the policies and what you should have in order to provide you with that level of protection that you require to protect your business. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Paul Horn. Thank you, Paul.
Here's our agenda for the next hour. We'll begin by talking about why we're actually here. We'll then get into the risk management process as a whole. Then we'll break into the risk register and a self-assessment. And at the end of the agenda, we're actually going to cover how you can change the data validation within the Excel spreadsheet that'll be provided to you today. The majority of vendors I'm going to discuss today I don't have any affiliation with, and they probably don't even realize I'm going to be discussing their products, aside from 6 Sense and Cisco Meraki, for which I am an authorized reseller. And that's mainly to help my clients get what they need and ensure they're not being sold something more than what they actually need. Every year, the World Economic Forum puts out a list of the top risks worldwide. To no surprise, cyber attacks are not only one of the most likely to happen, but it's also one that has a high impact. You can see infectious disease at the number 10 spot for impact. With the world of COVID, I suspect that'll definitely rise and break into the top 10 for likelihood as well in 2021. So, how do organizations address cybersecurity? The answer is by managing risks. Now, how do organizations manage risk? Well, they manage that via people, process, and technology. And today, we're going to mainly focus on process and technology. So let's take a look at a proven process. Now, don't be overwhelmed with what you see on the screen. We're going to start at a 10,000-foot view, and then we'll dive deeper where we need to. We also have firms of all sizes with us today, so I've added some additional context for small and larger firms. Now, if we start at the top where the employee is, employees generate risk, and they need an escalation path for the risks that they've either created or came across during the course of their duties. This is the area shown in red. The escalation path generally is to some type of committee, such as an Information Security Steering Committee, or maybe even a Risk Oversight Committee. These are the areas shown in yellow and in blue. You also want to define what occurs when a risk exceeds your firm's risk tolerance. In our example, this is where the address within 36, 18, or 9 months comes in. Now, risks that are outstanding and exceed your risk tolerance, they need to be escalated to executive management. The key here is for executive management to look at the risk and the business opportunity at the same time, not separately. Your resources for doing business initiatives and addressing risks are generally the same, as well as the funding to do them. Too often I see companies look at these in silos and agree to do more than they actually can do, or they simply just push off the risks to the business initiatives being priority. Now, if you take a look at the left-hand side of the screen, we have 5 business initiatives and 5 risk register items. Now we've decided to do 2 business initiatives and 3 risk register items. So our new business objectives are going to be 1, remediate patching, which comes from our risk register. We're definitely going to introduce a new product line, which is one of our main business initiatives. We then have remediate firewalls, which comes from our risk register. And then we absolutely need a new marketing strategy for our firm, and that comes from our business initiatives. And then finally, we have obtained cyber insurance, which is coming from our risk register. Now, let's go one level deeper into the process and actually look at a risk matrix. Now, I'm sure everybody's familiar with a risk matrix and has seen one. Most likely a 3x3, a 5x5, or a 6x6, typically red, yellow, green. In our example, we're using 4 colors: green, yellow, orange, and red. This is where you want your risk tolerance to be visible to all your employees. In our example, anything that exceeds 12 is beyond the level of risk which we're willing to take as a firm, and that is our risk tolerance. Now, depending on your firm's size, you may want to incorporate the elements your departments work with the most. That way, they're more informed of the risks that they're actually taking on a daily basis. For small firms, definitely stick with the general definition and the percentages. Now, for larger firms, you may want to try breaking out one additional area per department. For instance, your business development department, they may deal with onboarding new advisors, and that might be the most important thing for them to know and how that relates to risk. So what would be an insignificant number of new advisors? Is that 5 or less, 10 or less, 20 or less? There's no real right answer. That's something you're going to have to figure out internally. Now, once you have your matrix defined, you can then proceed to finalizing your ratings and the corrective action requirements for the levels which exceed your risk tolerance, as shown near the number 4. Now that we have a formal process, how are we going to track and evidence it? Well, this is done through the use of a risk register. While we're only going to focus on cybersecurity risks, you ultimately want to incorporate all of your risks into this document. Now, typically when I review a risk register, they don't break it down how you see it on the screen. It's generally a one-page document with probably 5 columns, and cybersecurity is always a single line item. It's always red. It always has the highest impact, the highest likelihood, and it never moves. Year after year, month after month, it never moves and it never shows any traction. Now, you need to decompress cybersecurity into multiple line items for that specific reason. This will also help you show progress when it's being made. It'll help you make better decisions on what to address first. It'll help you aid in developing a budget, forecasting. Before we get into the risks, these are in no specific order. Now, the first risk is patch management. If systems aren't properly patched due to systems no longer being on the network, due to the high increased numbers of remote workers, then the risk of something bad happening is fairly high, as depicted by the 20 in orange. This would be the same for any size firm. Now, if we invest in a cloud-based solution such as Sixense that no longer depends on systems being on the network, well, we can reduce the risk of something bad from happening to an acceptable level of low, which is depicted by the 4 in green. You can also see we documented our actions in the various columns. Now, in a few minutes, we're going to take a quick 2 minutes to explore the technical solution for this. But let's move to the second risk, which is firewalls. If the current firewalls are no longer supported and they can't perform the more advanced security functions needed, then the risk of something bad happening is very high, and that's depicted by the 25 in red. Again, this is going to be the same for any size firm. The main reason for this one being a 25 and patch management being a 20 is largely due to systems being decentralized, where the firewall controls a single entry point. Now, if we invest in the next generation firewalls, such as Cisco's Meraki firewalls that offer the advanced threat protection, as well as GeoIP filtering, we can reduce the percentages of something bad from happening to a more acceptable level of low, as depicted by the 4 in green. Now, I would like to just highlight something here as a security tip. From a firewall perspective, your ISP provider, they provide you a router. That is not a firewall. That firewall is not capable of protecting your business. And additionally, if you are not relying on foreign connections to your firm, you definitely want to go ahead and block the countries that are foreign that you really don't actually do business with. That's what your public website is for. Now, let's move to the third risk, backups. You'll notice this one's in gray, and the reason for that is it's closed out. However, we still need to track it in the event that that control no longer functions as needed. If you don't have an offsite and offline backup today, I highly encourage you to get one in place. This honestly is your ransomware safety net. Most people from their backups, they're backing them up, they're online, they're still connected to the network. If you're attacked, the first thing the hacker is going to do is go after your backups to make you not be able to recover, to then draw the ransom and make it even higher. Now, before we take a look at 6sense, I want to highlight something here that you may not be familiar with. And this really plays into the 6sense product. But at any rate, when Microsoft launched Windows 10, they changed their traditional way of releasing new operating systems. Upgrades from like Windows XP to Vista and 7, you traditionally got the disk, you had to download it, whatever the case might be. But Microsoft now has quality updates and feature updates, and these operate very much like how Apple has approached their operating systems, in that they release them more frequently instead of over several years. I would like to highlight feature updates are not automatic. These are not just automatically going to come down into your environment, and it's a little harder to do in a more enterprise scale, setup. But let's take a minute and let's have you check the version of Windows 10 that you have. So follow the instructions in the center of the screen in blue. If you have a version that is red, then you're no longer receiving security updates, just no different than if your machine was a Windows XP machine. Now, if you have a version that's yellow, then this week is your actual last week to receive security updates. Now, if you have one that's in green, then you're running one of the latest supported versions, and you're A-OK. Now, the reason I'm covering this is because it fundamentally changes how patch management is being performed on your devices in a large Microsoft shop. Now, your process now has to be more agile. There needs to be more testing. You're also going to need to account for all the new security functionality that's introduced on all these new feature updates. Now, hopefully you had one of the versions that's in green that's currently supported. If you had any version in red or even possibly the yellow, or if your version wasn't even displayed here, it was like a 1700 number, those are no longer supported. Just hopefully you leave here, you get a game plan in place at your firm to move to one of the supported versions. Definitely if you're running Windows XP, Windows Vista, Windows 7, those are no longer supported by Microsoft. Definitely put a game plan in place to upgrade to Windows 10 to one of the latest supported versions. So here we're inside the 6sense product, and as you can see here, the home page, it's pretty graphic where you can see some various pieces of data. The thing I'd like to jump into real quickly, because we were on the topic of the feature updates, they have a really good capability inside here where you can easily deploy those feature updates. As you can see here in my demo environment, I have one 1909 and then 3 of them that are in version 2004. Now, if we go back to the devices, what I really like about this is I can see not only the assets that I can manage, as you can see here, and it does manage Microsoft, Apple, and Linux products. But if I jump back over here to unmanaged devices and take a look, you can see that I have things in my ecosystem that I was unaware of. Now, in my test environment, I am aware of them, but in your case, you may have things that are similar to mine that you're not even familiar with. For instance, I have a Raspberry Pi on here. I actually have 2 of them. There's a Honeywell home AC, as well as an Apple TV. Some various other things here that you can see that have been discovered that are all IoT type devices. But if I collapse back up here to my sites and actually look at these assets, I'm just going to dive into one real quick. It gives you a lot of different data, and things like, hey, I can detect vulnerabilities. I can see when the last scans occurred. I can look at the security breakdown. Down here I can see, okay, well, there's 7 antivirus issues, some Windows user account issues. Here I have some Windows policy issues. And And it also tells me, when I was last scanning it and things like that. I can see all the different tasks that are associated to this system. I can even see the system and the usage, and to get a better idea of, hey, is this hard drive full? Things like that. If I wanted to, I can even go further and I can look at the patches individually. It'll tell me the CVSS score as well as the severity score, and all kind of different reports. I'll just show them to you real quick. But the other thing I like is the timeline, where I can actually see an evidence that, hey, look, I've been scanning this device, I've been recognizing new programs, I've been deploying things, it has history, and this thing goes all the way back to, in my case, 2013. There's some other things here. You can go straight into it. You can go PowerShell. You can look at the event viewer. All kind of different things as it relates to this particular asset. The one other really interesting and cool thing is, most environments have some tool that they have to provide remote help or remote assistance, and a lot of those tools have a lot of different security flaws. Some of the smaller firms may be using some products that have even been, compromised and have been exploited and things like that. This is all baked into this product, and in their case, they're using HTML version 5, so it runs at the system level, so I can easily hit on here. I can hit remote control, and within a few seconds, I'm logged into this device, and whether the device is logged in itself or not, as you can see here, this device isn't logged in, but really slick. It's all web-based, and like I said, that's really a really interesting feature of it. But I won't spend too much time inside of this tool. Let's go back to the risk register. Now that we're back at our risk register, our fourth risk is cyber insurance. Now, if we don't have a cyber insurance policy in place for the firm, then the risk of something bad happening is fairly high because we don't have any coverage, as depicted by the 16 in orange. Now, if we get a cyber insurance policy, say from Interweb Insurance, then we're reducing the risk of something bad from happening to a more manageable level, as depicted by the 8 in yellow. Now, you might be wondering, why is it only an 8? Well, the rationale for that is just by buying insurance doesn't change, the probability of something bad from happening. It only reduces the impact of it. Now, let's stick to cyber insurance, and let's welcome in Sherry from Interweb Insurance. Sherry, could you share with the audience some key elements of a cyber policy as well as any other relevant information?
Yes, I'd be happy to. I just had to jump back on. My computer died, of all things. This is cyber, right? So thanks for having me. I was so enthralled by getting to know you, Paul, and seeing this presentation for the first time, because this really is a great tool. And it's something that, like I was telling you, as a small business owner or a medium-sized business owner, we all want to do all of these great things, but without having a place to start, you kind of go in circles. This is a wonderful tool, and I don't know that came across real clearly, that everyone is going to have access to this risk register, so you can begin the process of laying out your plan. And keeping track of all of the things that you do need to keep track of, and having in one place a tool that can be shared across your organization. And I think that another great valuable piece of this is having a document that when FINRA or the SEC comes knocking and wanting to see how you have been managing your cyber risk, particularly in the event of a cyber event, having this plan and having this documented is really very important. And, so I just want to emphasize that for folks. This is a great tool to just map out all the moving parts of your environment and your risk. And you've been talking about risk management, and that's what this is really all about. And like you said, you started by saying that risk is usually a combination of people, process, and technology. And absolutely, the people is an important piece of this. And you also we're tying that into, this is a tool for your employees to create an environment of engagement and knowing when they need to raise something up the flagpole for the company to address. So when we talk about cyber insurance, there's really three big buckets of protection. It's coverage for yourself in the event you have systems damaged, you have data lost, you have ransoms to pay, you have data that has to be restored, you have maybe fines to pay because you've done something. You've got costs to notify harmed parties, such as getting them LifeLock and credit monitoring and all that. So that's kind of one bucket for covering you. Then you have what we call third party, so where you have liability to others for some type of failure that has affected someone. So you may have infected their data, you may have lost something, you may have created a phishing scheme that harmed someone. So there's that coverage for the third parties. And then there's some really interesting coverages that are being created all the time in response to the newest types of claims that come about. The cyber insurers have become very adaptable to what the new risks are. One of those things, for example, is something they call service fraud. So if you as an organization have been paying a bill to a longtime vendor and they suddenly hit you up and indicate you haven't paid them in several months, thinking that you've actually been paying a perpetrator. So that's something that they call service fraud. And then another really neat item is noted here on the risk register, which is vendor reviews. So there's obviously part of risk management is getting evidence and doing some due diligence that your vendors are protected, that they're doing what they need to do. Do they carry insurance? What are the protections there? That's an interesting element. But we can also fall back on some coverage within the cyber insurance portfolio that indicates you have coverage for what we call dependent networks. So whether you get, you suffer a loss because of a failure inside a dependent, an outside dependent network, the cause of the problem may be there, the breach may have been there, but if it's affected you, then you have protection, and vice versa. If you are a dependent network for someone else, that is an interesting adaptation to the coverage that's there. I also want to just talk a little bit about when you have other coverages. A lot of people think that, well, I have a cyber element in my E&O. I have a cyber element for crime in my fidelity bond. I have a cyber element within my general liability. Those are great, but they're not a full picture of coverage. There are so many elements of cyber protection. Usually those other elements are not going to pay for ransomware. They're not going to pay fines and penalties like a cyber policy would if you had to pay some kind of fine or penalty because of a breach. They're not going to provide the bench of experts of support, a lot of which Paul's organization provides. Those are all tools and support teams that will help you through a cyber event. And the last thing I just want to mention is that a lot of firms I talk to are trying to figure out how to get engagement. I mean, yes, they might want to buy coverage for their own firm, but there are many, many individuals in their organization, most of which are independent contractors outside and so forth. You know, what do we do about those folks? Well, the good news is that there is protection for what we call bring your own device, BYOD. And it is where the coverage is built in with this feature where you don't have to worry about the fact that people are now working from home and they're on their own laptops and using their own cell phones and they're not in your environment. They're in their own environment now, which adds a great deal of risk. And the engagement, trying to engage those folks in coverage is an interesting dilemma. Because you're trying to get them into engaging with coverage and you're wondering, how do I get them? They think it's too expensive, or they're not sure what to buy, or is it even necessary for them to have protection with us? So what most firms do is they get their own protection. It can cover these independent contractors too, for what they're doing within your environment and what they're doing on their own devices. But you can also structure it so that you can start small, get them engaged with a very small premium, which would be lower limits, some elementary coverage, very low cost. It could be as low as $100 a year, and get that going and slowly bring them in. The other thing we can do is a combination policy that covers everyone, including all the independent contractors. And when you divide up that premium and can spread that among all of the participants, it's very, very affordable. And the third thing that's really interesting that we can do now is what we call bulk quoting. So if we had all the information from your advisors, or about your advisors or your reps, whichever, your employees, or whatever kind of company we're dealing with, even, for example, real estate organizations, we can feed that information into the system and produce individual quotes for everyone based upon their own risk profile, and they would pay for that themselves and be covered individually and have their own separate policies. So there's lots of ways to access the coverage. My message is it's very broad. It is extremely affordable considering what it covers. And it is very adaptable to the industry. It's extremely negotiable. And it is a fantastic part of risk management. And, you know, what Paul is talking about here is this tool is amazing. It is just a wonderful way to really identify and understand your risk and address it in a very highly managed way. So unless there's any questions, I think I will just turn it back over to Paul.
Thanks, Sherry, for that great insight. You know, as we move to our fifth risk, which is vendor reviews, I know Sherry talked about this briefly, but, you know, if we don't perform due diligence of our vendors, you know, then the risk of something bad happening is high because we're not evaluating them and looking at them to see if they have the appropriate controls in place to protect the information we're giving to them, or the, you know, or the connections that they have to us, or whatever the case might be. But, you know, if we put a process in place that outsources, you know, the due diligence of our vendors to, say, TP vendor risk management, you know, then we're reducing the risk of something bad from happening to a more manageable level, as depicted by the 6 in yellow. Now, the last risk we're going to talk about is security monitoring. If we do not monitor our network with internal resources or hire an external party to monitor our ecosystem for cybersecurity threats around the clock, then the risk of something bad from happening is very high, as depicted by the 25 in red, because we're never going to know. If we choose to outsource this to, say, either TrustNet Inc. or Kivu Consulting, you know, then we're reducing the risk of something bad from happening to a more manageable level, as depicted by the 8 in yellow. Now, the biggest takeaway here is when you engage a vendor for security and monitoring, don't be fooled. You know, who is actually going to be monitoring your ecosystem? And too often, these are being performed by people that are not adequately trained in the field of cybersecurity, and whose primary job function may reside outside of cybersecurity. It may be in IT or some other part of the business. You know, just because you're a dentist and went to med school, that doesn't mean you would go to them to be treated for a broken bone. You know, this requires a different set of skills and a different specialty. Now we're going to take a look at a self-assessment. The MEP, which is the Manufacturing Extension Partnership, you know, they put together a really good cybersecurity assessment tool that you can easily get through within 10 to 15 minutes. You don't need to be a cyber expert to go through this by any means. You know, it's a great resource regardless of your firm's size. You know, this would be like the equivalent of licking your thumb and holding it up into the air to determine what way the wind is blowing. It's a quick and dirty way to find out how you fare as it relates to cybersecurity. But for a more in-depth assessment, you know, I highly encourage you to engage a cyber expert if you don't have one on staff that can perform the assessment. You know, these questions are very easy to navigate, as seen here. You know, the first question just really asks you what state. I didn't feel a need to put it on here. But at any rate, you know, the questions have a good, better, best type structure to them, as you'll see here in a few seconds. Now, I forgot to point out the The link to this assessment is the surveymonkey.com link as shown in yellow. But when you reach the end of the assessment, you're going to be provided a report card such as the one shown here. The green check indicates that you answered the question, and in this case, for question number 3, you received 2 out of the 3 points. Again, the good, better, best type answer. The best answer would have been the one that's highlighted. If your answer is depicted by a red X, that just indicates that you received 0 points for your answer. And honestly, you should be working towards any of the other answers just to get some credit for those points. Now, this assessment isn't recorded anywhere, so when you do reach the end, print it out or even save it to your desktop as a PDF or something like that so you have it for record keeping. But cybersecurity is much like a seatbelt. And I say that because back in 1955, Ford introduced the seatbelt into vehicles. While this wasn't mandatory for you to wear then, it was initially designed to save lives in the event of an accident, thus reducing your risk to, serious bodily harm or death. But, some people choose to wear it and others don't. This is where we are today in cybersecurity. We know good cyber hygiene will help us reduce the risk of something bad from happening, and some companies do it and others don't. In 1968, it became mandatory for all new vehicles in the U.S., and in 1984, New York was the first state to enforce, a law that required seatbelts to be worn by those in the front seat. This is much like HIPAA and PCI. You're required to have a certain level of cybersecurity in place. However, the HIPAA and PCI police aren't coming around knocking on your door and enforcing it. In essence, you can still choose not to put on a seatbelt and drive down the road. The only time you're going to get fined is when you get pulled over for not wearing it. And in our world, that's typically when you get breached. Choose to do something rather than nothing. I'd like to thank you for your time today. If you want to know more about the 6sense product or any of the other vendors that we talked about today, just reach out to me. My email's on the screen. Definitely email me if you want the free risk register. And then don't forget, before I pass it back to Lillian, stick around if you want to learn about how to change the data validation inside that document. But at this time, I'm going to turn it back over to Lillian.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that wonderful presentation, Paul and Sherry. Have a couple of comments, and maybe you can even elucidate on a couple of points. Sure. What I really like about the risk register, and Sherry, you brought it up, that with the increased requirements from FINRA and the SEC to keep track of your cybersecurity assessments and the steps that you have taken to at least identify and perhaps eliminate some of your vulnerabilities and risks, I also see this application working with respect to purchasing cybersecurity insurance at perhaps a more favorable rate. If you can create a risk register and maintain it, keep it up to date, as well as your self-assessment, and that's part of the package that you're presenting to an insurance carrier, don't you think that that carrier is going to give you a much more favorable rate because now you've got somebody who is actively involved in addressing and identifying those vulnerabilities?
Definitely. I mean, they do, pardon me, they do like to see those types of tools being used or some formal process. They ask questions about it. I think it also comes into play too. If you did have a cyber event, how well did you prepare in advance for that? What have you learned from that experience? Have you buttoned down the hatches? I mean, in my own organization, I had a scare. I didn't have an event, but I had a scare of an event. And, when I worked with my cyber insurer, they helped me get those things buttoned up. And, if you've done that in advance, it's just a really good thing to do.
And then also talking about insurance, there are at least two aspects to cybersecurity insurance. Certainly purchasing the policy to do that risk transfer. But then what is that carrier going to do in the event of a breach? And I think what distinguishes cyber insurance from professional liability or D&O insurance is that they have a staff or third-party vendors, third-party providers, such as Paul, who are ready and able to jump right in and to assist you in the event that there's a breach. So talk to us a little bit about that. What can you expect from that kind of assistance?
Well, the important thing with the cyber insurance and why it's important to have it is that you will immediately be connected with a cyber breach coach. When you report a claim, you're going to be talking to a cyber breach coach, and that person is an attorney. So while you're trying to figure out what happened, how did it happen, who was affected, whose fault was it, all that stuff, you don't want to be having that going on inside your organization with just random emails. You want to be talking to an attorney so that you have the protection of privileged communication. Because if there is liability later down the road, you don't want those emails and all that guesswork, being that can potentially harm you, be discoverable if you do have liability. So that's the first thing. Plus, they just know. They know who to connect you with, who they need to put on the case. Is there a forensic look required? How much of that can they do themselves? There's some carriers that you get them on the phone and they're having you email them the emails that you receive that you think are fraudulent so they can see the code on the back. And there's no need for that $25,000 forensic expert, But seriously, when you buy cyber insurance, for your premium dollars, you are getting thousands and thousands of dollars worth of benefits because you have access to these folks to help you if you even suspect there's a problem.
And at this point, there are how many carriers? 50, 100, 200 carriers out there that are offering cybersecurity policies. Each one is different and unique. Yep. And what's really important to understand, and what is so critical about working with someone with your level of experience, is that you really need to appreciate the nuances. If you're an independent broker-dealer, well, your risks and vulnerabilities and needs are going to be very different from a wirehouse, or very different from a small organization where everyone is sitting in the same office versus hundreds, perhaps thousands of independent reps or independent advisors all over the country. And those issues need to be addressed and covered.
Well, and I'll comment too, it's not just me as an insurance broker that I understand cyber insurance. It's also important that that cyber insurance is marrying very well to the actual coverage, because your activities as a broker, dealer, or investment advisor, those risks are entirely different than someone who is on Main Street selling watches. There's a very different type of risk and exposure, and not all cyber policies will address the fact that you're moving people's money, that you have independent contractor model. Not everybody that's creating risk for you is not employees. There's a whole lot of nuances in the coverage that you have to know about, just the same way why you would engage Paul to help you with your cyber needs, because he understands your business, and that's the number one thing that you want to look for too. You want to engage experts that understand your business.
Absolutely. And Paul does have experience working with broker-dealers. Well, I want to thank you both again very, very much for joining us today and sharing this incredibly valuable information. So both Sherry and Paul are IBDC Alliance members. They're part of our panel of experts that are available for our members. And what we try to do with offering these workshops, and we are going to be offering them on a monthly basis, is to give you hands-on information. Today, we actually gave you that risk register and self-assessment. So we hope that you'll be able to use that. Our next workshop is coming up on January 21, and we've got a team from Willis Towers Watson who are going to be talking with us about behavior and how behavior within a certain sector of the industry, this particular case it will be broker-dealers and RIAs, and how it impacts the various claims that we're seeing. We're seeing an increase in trade error. We're seeing an increase in selling away. So we're going to be talking about some behavioral issues, what's going on, perhaps somewhat related to COVID and the current state of our economic environment. So stay tuned. I'll be sending out information on that workshop. And I want to thank you very much for joining us again today.
So here's the risk register document you're going to be provided. And the first tab is the dashboard tab. This is just giving you an overview of everything within the actual corporate risk register tab. This is great to take to meetings and whatnot. But if we jump over to the second tab, the corporate risk register tab, a lot of the fields, the cells within this document, are drop downs, and that's being pulled from the data valuation or data validation, I should say, within the scale tab. For instance, let's say in this category here, you wanted to add another department, and that department was business development. Well, we go ahead and type that in there, and now we need to see if that's going to show. Well, that's definitely not going to show over here. As you can see, it's not in the drop down. So what we need to do is change the lookup for this. So if we go up top here to data validation, again, click on data validation, we can see our list here. Well, let's just delete this out. Well, we know that we want to look at the scale tab, and we're going to click on the top row and drag all the way down to where we want it to be and hit enter. And now that'll change and update. As you can see, we have business development here. I'm going to change it back to cyber. But that's how you change and update things. If you just want to actually change any existing thing, so for instance, this company D, if we want to call that company F, well, we can make that change. And then if we go back over to the corporate risk register piece in the business line, we can actually see company F now. That should automatically update for you. So that's how you do some of the changes over here from the scale perspective. If you want to add anything new, you can add a new a column and define everything you want over here for it to look up. But again, just don't change anything over in this area. This area is actually feeding your dashboard. But if you have any questions, by all means, reach out to me. I can kind of help you out if it's not too complicated.